Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Life-Changing True Stories. Today, I bring you a powerful and deeply loving story, one filled with warmth, care, emotion, high drama, and an incredible narrative. Before begin, let us take a moment to pray together. Heavenly Father, we come before you with humble hearts, seeking your love and guidance. Bless this beautiful family with peace, joy, and wisdom. May every word shared here today bring light, healing, and inspiration. Fill our hearts with kindness, understanding, and unconditional love. Protect us from negativity and lead us on the path of righteousness we trust. Victoria Sterling stood in the marble hallway of Nathan Cross's penthouse, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The golden light from the crystal chandelier cast long shadows across the polished floor, but none as dark as the shadow that had fallen over her life in the past hour. Her hands trembled as she clutched the pregnancy test behind her back, the two pink lines still vivid in her memory. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times, imagining Nathan's face softening with joy, his strong arms wrapping around her as they planned their future together. Instead, she found herself facing a man whose expression had turned to ice. The moment she whispered the words that should have brought celebration. Nathan Cross was a man who had built his empire on precision and control. At 32, he commanded boardrooms with the same authority that ancient kings once ruled kingdoms. His dark hair was always perfectly styled, his suits tailored to perfection, and his steel-gray eyes could cut through any negotiation with surgical precision. He had never met a problem that money couldn't solve or a challenge that determination couldn't overcome. But standing in his living room, listening to Victoria's trembling voice tell him about the life growing inside her, he felt something he had spent years avoiding. Fear. Not the calculated risk of a business venture, but the raw, primal terror of losing control over his carefully constructed world. The ultimatum, the silence stretched between them like a chasm. Victoria watched Nathan's face transform from surprise to something colder, more distant. His jaw tightened, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the same tone he used during hostile takeover meetings. There was no warmth, no recognition of the love they had shared for the past 2 years. "You have 48 hours to leave," he said, each word falling like a stone into still water. "I'll have my assistant arrange for a financial settlement, enough to ensure you're comfortable, but this ends here." Victoria felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had expected many reactions, had prepared for confusion, even for initial shock. But she had never imagined this cold dismissal, this complete rejection of everything they had built together. "Nathan, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought you would be happy. We talked about the future, about building something together." But even as she spoke, she saw the walls rising in his eyes, the same impenetrable barriers he erected during business negotiations. Nathan turned away from her, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. His empire sprawled below him, glittering with promise and power. And he reminded himself that this was what mattered: control, success, legacy. Not the messy complications of family and emotion that destroyed his own father's business empire. "I never promised you forever, Victoria," he said without turning around. "I made my priorities clear from the beginning. This doesn't fit into my plans." The departure. Victoria packed her belongings that night with tears streaming down her face, but she refused to let Nathan see her break completely. She moved through his penthouse like a ghost, gathering the few personal items that had made the space feel like home. The silk scarf he had brought her from Paris, the books they had read together on lazy Sunday mornings, the photo from their weekend in the mountains where his smile had been genuine and unguarded. Each item felt like a small death, a piece of the life she had imagined crumbling in her hands. As she folded her clothes into the single suitcase she had arrived with 2 years earlier, Victoria felt something shift inside her. The heartbreak was still there, sharp and consuming, but beneath it grew something stronger. She placed her hand over her still flat stomach and whispered a promise to the tiny life inside her. "I will love you enough for both of us," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "You will never doubt that you are wanted, that you are precious, that you matter more than all the money in the world." Nathan never emerged from his study that night, sat behind his mahogany desk, staring at contracts he couldn't focus on, listening to the soft sounds of Victoria moving through his home for the last time. Part of him wanted to go to her, to take back the cruel words and hold her close. But every time he considered it, he remembered his father's business falling apart when family obligations clouded his judgment. He had built everything he owned, by keeping his heart locked away, and he wouldn't let sentiment destroy what had taken him years to create. The struggle begins. Victoria's new life started in a cramped studio apartment on the other side of the city, where the rent consumed most of her savings, and the walls were thin enough to hear every argument and celebration of her neighbors. Financial settlement Nathan had provided was generous, but came with conditions that made her stomach turn. She was never to contact him again, never to make any claim on his estate, never to mention his name in connection with her child. She signed the papers with a hand that shook with rage and heartbreak, knowing she had no choice but to accept his terms. The pregnancy was difficult from the beginning. Morning sickness kept her bedridden for weeks, and the stress of her situation made everything worse. She had cut ties with most of her friends during her relationship with Nathan, drawn into his exclusive world of charity, galas, and business dinners. Now, facing the reality of single motherhood, she felt more alone than she ever had in her life. She found work at a small marketing firm, grateful for the modest salary that would keep her afloat, but knowing it would never provide the security she wanted for her child. Little Emma arrives. Emma Sterling came into the world on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, her arrival both the most beautiful and most terrifying moment of Victoria's life. The labor was long and difficult. Victoria gripped the hand of the nurse who had volunteered to stay past her shift, having no one else to call. When the doctor finally placed the tiny red-faced baby on her chest, Victoria felt her heart expand in ways she never knew were possible. Emma had dark hair that curled at the edges and eyes that would later turn the same deep blue as her father's. Though Victoria couldn't bear to acknowledge the resemblance in those early days, the first months were a blur of sleepless nights, an endless worry. Victoria learned to function on 2 hours of sleep, to change diapers with one hand while answering work emails with the other. She discovered strength she never knew she possessed, finding ways to stretch every dollar and make their tiny apartment feel like a home. She painted the walls with cheap paint and soft pastels, hung curtains she sewed herself, and filled the space with secondhand furniture that she refinished during Emma's naps. Growing together as Emma grew from a helpless infant into a curious toddler, Victoria watched her daughter's personality emerge with wonder and fierce protectiveness. Emma was fearless in the way only children can be, climbing onto chairs to reach high shelves and babbling conversations with her reflection in the mirror. She had an infectious laugh that could brighten Victoria's darkest days, and a stubborn streak that reminded her painfully of Nathan. Though she tried to push those thoughts away, Victoria threw herself into being the best mother she could be. She read parenting books late into the night, researched the best preschools she could afford, and saved every penny she could for Emma's future. She wanted her daughter to have every opportunity, every advantage she could provide. The love between them grew into something fierce and unbreakable, a bond forged in the crucible of their shared struggle. The weight of secrets as Emma began to ask questions about her father, Victoria struggled with how much to reveal. She had prepared answers about how some families looked different, how love came in many forms, but the questions grew more specific as Emma got older. "Where is my daddy?" became a regular refrain, usually asked at bedtime when Emma's defenses were down and her curiosity ran free. Victoria would stroke her daughter's hair and tell her that her daddy lived far away, that sometimes grown-ups made choices that kept families apart, but that Emma was loved completely and perfectly just as they were. But in quiet moments, when Emma was sleeping and the apartment felt too small for Victoria's restless energy, she would find herself wondering about Nathan. Had he thought about them over the years? Did he ever regret his decision? She had seen his name in business magazines, watched his company's stock price climb, observed from a distance as he became even more successful and powerful. Part of her hoped he was miserable, that the emptiness she felt was mirrored in his perfect, controlled life. But another part, the part she tried to keep buried, still remembered the man who had made her laugh, who had held her through thunderstorms, who had once looked at her like she was the most important thing in his world. By Emma's third birthday, Victoria had managed to create something resembling stability. She had been promoted at work, allowing them to move to a slightly larger apartment with a small balcony where Emma could play safely. She had made friends with other single mothers at Emma's daycare, women who understood the unique challenges of raising children alone. They formed an unofficial support network, trading babysitting duties and sharing resources, creating the village that each of them needed to survive and thrive. Victoria enrolled Emma in dance classes and swimming lessons, stretching their budget to give her daughter experiences that might spark joy or talent. She watched from the sidelines as Emma twirled across the studio floor or paddled determinedly across the shallow end of the pool, her heart swelling with pride at her daughter's courage and enthusiasm. These were the moments that made all the sacrifice worthwhile. The times when Victoria knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice in keeping Emma in building this life they shared. The shadow of the past, but even as they built their new normal, the shadow of Nathan's rejection never completely disappeared. Victoria found herself looking for him in Emma's expressions, in the determined set of her jaw when she wanted something, in the way she could focus intensely on a project until it was perfect. She wondered if Emma would grow up to be like her father, driven and ambitious, or if she would inherit Victoria's gentler nature. The uncertainty was both thrilling and terrifying. A reminder that no matter how carefully Victoria tried to control their world, part of Emma would always remain a mystery rooted in the man who had walked away from them both. As Emma's fourth birthday approached, Victoria began to realize that their story was far from over. The choices Nathan had made in fear and arrogance had set them on a path neither of them could have predicted. She had no way of knowing that across the city, in his glass tower office, Nathan Cross was about to discover that some decisions can never truly be undone, and that the family he had rejected would soon become the only thing he truly wanted. In his carefully controlled world, 5 years of silence, Nathan Cross stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office. The city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he had conquered through sheer willpower and ruthless determination. 5 years had passed since he had given Victoria her ultimatum, 5 years during which his empire had expanded beyond his wildest dreams. Cross Industries now owned hotels in 12 countries, had partnerships with tech giants, and his personal wealth had tripled. By every measure that mattered in his world, he was a tremendous success. Yet as he stood there, watching the traffic crawl through the streets below, Nathan felt an emptiness that no amount of money seemed able to fill. The loneliness had crept up on him gradually, like a slow poison working its way through his veins. At first, he had thrown himself into work with even greater intensity, using 18-hour days to drown out any thoughts of Victoria and the choice she had forced him to make. He told himself he had been right to prioritize his career, right to avoid the complications of family life. He dated occasionally beautiful women who understood that his heart was not available, who were content with expensive dinners and lavish gifts in exchange for companionship that never went deeper than the surface. But in quiet moments, usually late at night when even his relentless ambition couldn't keep his thoughts occupied, Nathan found himself wondering about the life he had rejected. He never allowed himself to research Victoria, or try to find out what had become of her. That would have been a weakness he couldn't afford. Instead, he buried the questions beneath layers of success and achievement, telling himself that curiosity was just another emotion that successful men learn to control. The Charity Gala. Hamilton Children's Hospital Charity Gala was one of those events that Nathan attended more out of obligation than genuine interest. His company was a major sponsor, and his presence was expected among the city's elite. He moved through the glittering ballroom with practiced ease, shaking hands and making conversation with the kind of people who measured their worth in stock portfolios and social connections. The evening was proceeding exactly as he had expected until he saw her across the crowded room. The champagne glass in his hand nearly slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers. Victoria stood near the silent auction tables, her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon that emphasized the graceful line of her neck. She wore a simple black dress that Nathan suspected had cost a fraction of what the other women in the room had spent on their designer gowns. Yet she looked more beautiful than he remembered. There was a confidence in her posture that hadn't been there 5 years ago, a strength that spoke of battles fought and won through her own determination. But what stopped Nathan's breath entirely was the little girl beside her. A child with dark curls and bright blue eyes, who was examining the auction items with intense curiosity. Emma Sterling was 5 years old now, though Nathan had no way of knowing her name or her age. All he could see was a miniature version of himself staring back at him across the years. A living reminder of the choice he had made and the life he had rejected. The child had his eyes, his stubborn chin, even the way she tilted her head when she was concentrating on something. The resemblance was so strong that Nathan felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him dizzy and disoriented in the middle of the crowded ballroom. The recognition Victoria sensed his presence before she saw him, a familiar prickle of awareness. That used to make her heart race with anticipation when she turned and met Nathan's stare across the room. She felt the carefully constructed walls around her heart tremble for just a moment before she reinforced them. With 5 years of hard-won strength, she had known this moment might come eventually. The city was large, but their social circles occasionally overlapped, especially at events like this where the wealthy gathered to ease their consciences with charitable donations. She placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder, drawing her daughter closer as Nathan began to move through the crowd toward them. Victoria's mind raced through possible escape routes, ways to get Emma out of the ballroom before Nathan could get close enough to see what she knew he had already seen. But Emma, oblivious to the tension crackling through the air, was fascinated by a painting in the silent auction and refused to be hurried along. "Mommy, look at this one," Emma said, pointing to a watercolor landscape. "It looks like the park where we have our picnics." Her voice was clear and bright, carrying easily through the chatter of the adults around them. Nathan, still several feet away but close enough to hear, stopped walking as though he had been struck by lightning. The sound of that sweet, innocent voice calling Victoria Mommy made everything real in a way that simply seeing the child hadn't quite managed. The confrontation when Nathan finally reached them, Victoria was ready. She had spent 5 years imagining this moment, preparing for the day when she would have to face the man who had rejected their daughter before she was even born. She lifted her chin and met his gaze with steady determination, refusing to let him see how much his presence still affected her. Emma looked between the two adults with the sharp intelligence children possess, sensing the undercurrents she couldn't quite understand. "Victoria," Nathan said, and his voice was rougher than she remembered, as though the single word had scraped against his throat on its way out. Looked down at Emma, and Victoria saw something break behind his eyes, some carefully maintained composure cracking under the weight of recognition and regret. "She's beautiful," he whispered, and the pain in his voice was so raw that Victoria felt an unwilling stab of sympathy. "Her name is Emma," Victoria said quietly, her hands still resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. "She's 5 years old." She didn't need to say anything else. The math was simple enough, and Nathan was nothing if not intelligent. Emma looked up at the tall stranger with curious eyes, tilting her head in that gesture Nathan recognized as his own. Emma, with the fearless curiosity of childhood, stepped slightly forward and extended her small hand. "Hello," she said politely. "I'm Emma Sterling. Are you a friend of my mommy's?" The innocence of the question hit Nathan like a physical blow. Here was his daughter, perfect and precious, offering him the kind of unconditional acceptance he had never deserved and certainly hadn't earned. The revelation ate of them knelt down to Emma's level, his expensive suit forgotten as he took her tiny hand in his much larger one. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. She had his eyes, but there was something of Victoria's gentleness in them too, a warmth that his own gaze had always lacked. "I knew your mommy a long time ago," he said carefully, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before you were born." Emma nodded solemnly, as though this explained everything. "Mommy has pictures of before I was born," she said. "She looks different. Her tummy was really big." She placed her free hand over her own small stomach to demonstrate, and Nathan felt something inside his chest crack wide open. Victoria had been pregnant in those pictures, carrying his child, and he had sent them both away. Victoria watched the exchange with a mixture of fear and fascination. She had dreaded this moment for years, but she had never imagined seeing Nathan look so broken, so completely undone by the reality of what he had given up. The arrogant, controlling man who had dismissed them from his life was nowhere to be seen. Instead, she saw someone who looked lost, desperate, and utterly unprepared for the magnitude of his own mistakes. "Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go look at that painting again?" Victoria suggested gently. "I need to talk to this gentleman for just a moment." Emma obediently skipped back to the auction table, her attention already captured by something new. Victoria waited until her daughter was out of earshot before turning back to Nathan, her expression carefully neutral despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "The reckoning 5 years?" Nathan said, his voice hollow. "She's been alive for 5 years and I never knew." He stood slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. "Victoria, I never imagined you would actually have the baby. I thought you might choose not to, and when I never heard from you again, I assumed." "You assumed I'd gotten rid of your problem," Victoria finished for him, her voice sharp with old pain. "You assumed that I would take your money and disappear? That I would make the choice you were too coward to make yourself?" Deep breath, trying to keep her voice low so Emma wouldn't hear. "Well, I did disappear, Nathan. I took your money and I built a life for us, just the two of us. And we've been perfectly fine without you." Nathan flinched as though she had struck him. "I can see that," he said quietly. "She's incredible, Victoria. She's smart and beautiful and perfect, and she has your strength. I can see it in the way she looks at the world." Paused, struggling with words that felt too big for his throat. "I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you walk away." Victoria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough tears over Nathan Cross to fill an ocean, and she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break down now. "You didn't let me walk away, Nathan," she said firmly. "You threw us away. You gave me 48 hours to get out of your life, and you made it very clear that we were nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed." Emma's innocent questions, Emma returned to her mother's side, having grown bored with the artwork. She looked up at Nathan with open curiosity, unaware of the tension crackling between the adults. "Are you very tall, or is everyone else very short?" she asked him seriously, and despite everything, Nathan felt his lips curve into the first genuine smile he had worn in years. "I think I might be a little taller than most people," he admitted, crouching down again to bring himself closer to her level. "What do you think?" Emma studied him with the intense concentration she had inherited from him, then nodded approvingly. "I think you're just right," she declared. "Mommy says that everyone is exactly the right size for who they're supposed to be." She paused, tilting her head in that familiar gesture. "Do you have children? You seem like you would be a good daddy." Innocent question hit Nathan like a knife between the ribs. He glanced at Victoria, seeing the pain flicker across her face before she managed to hide it again. "No," he said softly. "I don't have any children." The lie felt like poison on his tongue, but he couldn't bring himself to claim a relationship with Emma that he had never earned the right to have. Emma nodded thoughtfully. "That's okay," she said with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "Not everyone gets to be a daddy. Some people have other important jobs." She smiled at him with such genuine warmth that Nathan felt his chest tighten with something that might have been love. If he still remembered what that felt like. The departures. The evening wound down. Victoria made their excuses and prepared to leave. She could feel Nathan's eyes following them as she helped Emma into her coat. She knew he was memorizing every detail of their daughter's face, storing up images against a future he probably thought would be just as empty as his past. Of her felt sorry for him, but a larger part remembered the cold dismissal in his voice 5 years ago. The way he had reduced their relationship to a business transaction. "Victoria, wait!" Nathan called as they reached the ballroom's entrance. She turned back reluctantly, Emma's hands secure in hers. "Could we talk, just for a few minutes, please?" Victoria looked down at Emma, who was yawning and leaning against her leg. Her daughter had school in the morning, and it was already past her bedtime. But there was something in Nathan's voice, a desperate quality that she had never heard before, that made her hesitate. "Not tonight," she said finally. Needs to get home." She paused, then made a decision that surprised them both. "But if you want to talk, really talk, then maybe we can arrange something. It's just us. Without Emma, she doesn't need to be part of whatever this is between us." Nathan nodded eagerly, relief flooding his features. "Yes," he said. Please, Victoria. I need to understand. I need to know about her, about both of you. I need to know what I've missed." Victoria studied his face for a long moment, searching for any sign of the cold arrogance that had driven her away 5 years ago. What she saw instead was a man who looked haunted by his own choices, desperate for a chance at redemption he'd probably didn't deserve. Against her better judgment, she felt the first crack in the wall she had built around her heart. "I'll think about it," she said quietly, then turned and walked away, Emma's small hand trustingly clasped in hers. Behind them, Nathan stood alone in the glittering ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of people but feeling more isolated than he ever had in his life. He had built an empire, but he had lost his family. And for the first time in 5 years, he began to understand the true cost of his success. 3 days after the charity gala, Victoria found herself sitting across from Nathan in a quiet coffee shop on the other side of town, far from the usual haunts of the wealthy elite. She had chosen the location deliberately, wanting to meet him somewhere neutral, somewhere that belonged to her world rather than his. Nathan looked oddly out of place among the mismatched furniture and local art, his expensive suit standing out like a beacon among the casual dress of the other customers. But he didn't seem to notice or care about the stares he was attracting. His entire focus was on the woman sitting across from him, the woman who held the key to the life he had thrown away. Victoria had left Emma with her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, a kind widow who had become like a grandmother to Emma over the years. She had told her daughter that she had an important meeting for work, which wasn't entirely a lie. This conversation would determine the future of their carefully constructed life, and that was certainly important business. Victoria had spent the past 3 days trying to prepare for this moment, trying to armor herself against whatever Nathan might say or promise. She knew better than to trust him, but she also couldn't ignore the broken look in his eyes when he had seen Emma for the first time. Nathan's hands shook slightly as he lifted his coffee cup, and Victoria noticed that he looked older than he had at the gala. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago, and his perfect hair showed threads of silver at the temples. Success, it seemed, had not been as kind to him as she had imagined. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "Almost didn't," Victoria admitted. She studied his face, looking for any sign of the man she had once loved beneath the stranger sitting across from her. "But Emma has been asking questions about her father lately. Questions I don't know how to answer. I thought maybe it was time I understood what I'm supposed to tell her." The confession. Nathan set down his coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly. For a man who had commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals, he seemed remarkably nervous about this conversation. "I've spent the last 5 years telling myself that I made the right choice," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I convinced myself that I was protecting my business, my reputation, my carefully planned future. I told myself that you and the baby would be better off without me, that I wasn't cut out to be a father." He paused, running a hand through his hair and destroying its perfect styling. "But seeing Emma the other night, seeing what an incredible, the little person she is, I realized that every justification I gave myself was just cowardice dressed up as logic. I was terrified, Victoria. Terrified of losing control. Terrified of failing at something that mattered more than money or power. So I chose the coward's way out. I threw away the most important thing that ever happened to me because I was too afraid to fight for it." Victoria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough over Nathan Cross to last several lifetimes. "Do you have any idea what the last 5 years have been like?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the emotion churning inside her. "Do you know what it's like to explain to a 3-year-old that her daddy doesn't want to meet her? You know what it's like to work double shifts just to afford dance lessons? Because your daughter loves to move to music, the same way her father used to when he thought no one was watching?" Nathan's face crumpled at her words. "I remember," he whispered. "You used to play that old jazz album, and I would dance with you in the kitchen. I haven't danced since you left. I haven't listened to music at all. The proposal, what do you want?" "From us, Nathan," Victoria asked directly. She had learned over the past 5 years that dancing around difficult topics only made them harder to resolve. "Why are you here? What do you think this conversation is going to accomplish?" Nathan leaned forward, his gray eyes intense, with something that might have been desperation. "I want a chance," he said. "I want to know my daughter. I want to be part of her life, if she'll let me. I know I don't deserve it. I know I have no right to ask after what I did. But Victoria, she's incredible. She's funny and smart and brave, and she has your compassion along with what I hope are some of my better qualities. I want to watch her grow up. I want to be there for soccer games and school plays and all the little moments that make up a childhood."
Oh, and
"What about me?" Victoria asked quietly. "Do you think you can just waltz back into our lives and pretend that the last 5 years never happened? Do you think Emma needs a father who might disappear again the moment things get difficult?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, considering her questions with the seriousness they deserved. "I don't know how to answer that," he said finally. "I can't promise that I'll be perfect because I've never been a father before. I can't promise that I won't make mistakes because I'm still learning how to put someone else's needs before my own ambitions. But I can promise that I will never walk away from her again. I can promise that if you give me a chance to prove myself, I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to be worthy of being her father." Emma's choice Victoria was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the busy street beyond. She watched parents pushing strollers and children skipping alongside their families. And she thought about all the times Emma had pressed her face to their apartment window, watching other families and asking careful questions about fathers and what they did. "She asks about you," Victoria said finally. "Not by name, because she doesn't know your name. But she asks about her father. She wants to know if he's tall like she's going to be, if he likes to read the way she does, if he would be proud of her drawings." Nathan's breath caught in his throat. "What do you tell her?" "I tell her that her father lives far away, and that sometimes grown-ups make choices that keep families apart," Victoria said. "I tell her that it's not her fault, that she is loved and wanted and perfect exactly as she is. But I can see in her eyes that she wonders if there's something wrong with her, some reason why her father doesn't want to meet her." The pain in Nathan's expression was so raw that Victoria had to look away. "There's nothing wrong with her," he said fiercely. "She's perfect, Victoria. She's absolutely perfect, and the only thing wrong in this situation is me. I'm the one who was too broken and scared to see what a gift I was being offered." Victoria turned back to him, studying his face with the careful attention of someone who had been hurt before and couldn't afford to be hurt again. "If I let you into her life," she said slowly, "it has to be on my terms. You don't get to disrupt the stability we've built just because you finally realize what you threw away. You don't get to confuse her with promises you might not keep." "Rules, what would your terms be?" Nathan asked, and Victoria was struck by how different he sounded from the man who had given her an ultimatum 5 years ago. There was no arrogance in his voice now, no assumption that his wealth and power gave him the right to dictate the terms of their relationship. Victoria had been thinking about this possibility for days. Ever since the moment at the charity gala when she saw the recognition in Nathan's eyes, she had made a mental list of conditions, rules that would protect Emma's heart and her own. "First," she said, "you don't get to be her father until you prove you can be a friend. You earn her trust slowly, and you let her set the pace. If she doesn't want to see you, you respect that. If she has questions you can't answer, you don't lie to her." Nathan nodded eagerly. "Of course. What else?" "You don't use your money to try to buy her affection," Victoria continued. "She doesn't need expensive toys or fancy trips. She needs consistency and reliability. She needs to know that when you say you'll be somewhere, you'll be there. Needs to know that you're interested in who she is, not just in easing your own guilt." "I understand," Nathan said. "What else?" Victoria took a deep breath before stating her final condition. "You don't get to hurt her the way you hurt me. If you decide this is too hard, if you decide that being a father doesn't fit into your carefully planned life, you walk away cleanly. You don't string her along with empty promises, and you don't make her feel like your rejection is somehow her fault." Nathan was quiet for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy cloak. "I won't hurt her, Victoria," he said finally. "I swear to you I will never put her through what I put you through. I know I don't have the right to ask for your trust, but I'm asking anyway. Give me a chance to prove that I've changed, that I can be the man you and Emma deserve." The first steps due weeks later, Victoria found herself in the park with Emma, watching her daughter feed ducks at the pond while Nathan sat on a bench nearby. It had taken several careful conversations to prepare Emma for this meeting. Explanations about how sometimes people from her mother's past wanted to be friends, how it was okay to be curious but also okay to feel shy or uncertain. Emma had listened with the serious attention she gave to all important matters and announced that she would like to meet the tall man with eyes like hers. Nathan had arrived at the park looking nervous and overdressed, his expensive casual wear still somehow formal compared to the other parents scattered around the playground. He carried a simple bag of breadcrumbs for the ducks, a suggestion Victoria had made when he asked what he should bring. Emma had approached him with the fearless curiosity that had always been her hallmark, offering him her small hand and asking if he knew how to feed ducks properly. For the next hour, Victoria watched as Nathan learned to follow Emma's lead, letting her teach him the rules of duck feeding and listening seriously as she explained the personalities of each bird. He seemed genuinely fascinated by her stories, asking thoughtful questions and laughing at her jokes with real delight. There was none of the forced enthusiasm Victoria had seen from other adults who felt obligated to entertain children.
Hi, Nathan.
Seemed genuinely charmed by Emma's company, content to let her set the agenda for their time together. Growing trust over the following months, Nathan became a regular part of their weekend routine. He would meet them at the park or the library, always bringing something simple but thoughtful. A book he thought Emma might enjoy, a packet of seeds for the small garden she was trying to grow on their balcony, crayons in the exact shade of blue she had been looking for. He never overwhelmed her with expensive gifts, seeming to understand instinctively that Emma valued attention and time far more than material things. Victoria watched these interactions with a mixture of wonder and wariness. The man she was getting to know bore little resemblance to the cold, controlling person who had dismissed her from his life. This Nathan listened more than he spoke, asked questions instead of giving orders, and seemed genuinely interested in Emma's thoughts and opinions about everything from her favorite books to her theories about why clouds had different shapes. Emma, for her part, seemed to bloom under Nathan's attention. She began looking forward to their meetings, asking during the week when they would see their friend Nathan again. She showed him her artwork and read him stories she had written, basking in his praise and genuine interest. Victoria could see her daughter's confidence growing, could see the way Emma stood a little taller when Nathan told her how smart or creative or funny she was. The moment of truth. Turning point came on a rainy Saturday afternoon when Emma came down with a fever and had to cancel their planned trip to the zoo. Victoria called Nathan to let him know, expecting him to reschedule for the following weekend. Instead, he asked if he could bring soup and help take care of Emma the way any friend would do. Victoria found herself agreeing before she had time to think about the implications of letting him into their home. Into the private sanctuary she and Emma had created together, Nathan arrived with homemade soup from Emma's favorite restaurant, and a small bouquet of flowers that made Emma giggle with delight despite her fever. He spent the afternoon reading to her while Victoria caught up on laundry, his voice gentle and soothing as he worked his way through Emma's entire collection of picture books. When Emma dozed off on the couch, he stayed beside her, one hand resting lightly on her forehead to monitor her fever. Victoria found herself watching from the kitchen doorway, struck by the tenderness in Nathan's expression as he gazed down at their sleeping daughter. This was not a man fulfilling an obligation or trying to impress anyone. This was a father caring for his child with instinctive protectiveness, and the sight of it broke down the last of Victoria's carefully maintained defenses. That evening, after Emma's fever had broken and she was sleeping peacefully in her own bed, Victoria and Nathan sat in her small living room drinking tea and talking in quiet voices. The apartment looked shabby compared to the luxury Nathan was accustomed to, but he seemed perfectly comfortable among the second-hand furniture and handmade decorations. "She's going to ask soon," Victoria said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them, "about who you really are. She's too smart not to have figured out that there's more to this story than we've told her." Nathan nodded, his hands wrapped around his mug as though he needed its warmth to steady himself. "What will you tell her?" "The truth," Victoria said simply. "That you're her father. That you weren't ready to be a daddy when she was born, but that you've learned how important family is. She'll want to know why you stayed away for so long, and I'll tell her that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and have to work very hard to fix them." Nathan was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of her words. "Do you think she... forgive me?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Victoria studied his face in the soft lamplight. Seeing vulnerability there that she remembered from their earliest days together, before success and power had hardened him into someone she couldn't recognize. "She already loves you, Nathan," she said gently. "She doesn't know there's anything to forgive yet. The question is whether you'll be able to forgive yourself." The family they became 6 months later, Emma Sterling-Cross celebrated her 6th birthday with the biggest party she had ever had. It wasn't the most expensive party, but it was filled with all the people who mattered most to her. Her mother was there, of course, and Mrs. Patterson from next door, and her friends from school and dance class. And there was Nathan, who had become simply Daddy after the day. Emma had looked at him seriously and announced that she had figured out who he really was. Could they please stop pretending otherwise? Nathan had legally changed Emma's name to include his own, not out of pride of ownership, but as a promise that he would never let her question her place in his life again. He had also moved out of his penthouse, choosing instead a family-friendly house with a yard where Emma could play in a kitchen big enough for the three of them to cook together on Sunday mornings. The transition hadn't been without its challenges. Emma had moments of confusion about why her daddy had been away for so long. And there were nights when she clung to Victoria with extra fierceness, as though afraid that other important people might disappear from her life. Nathan proved his commitment by being patient with her fears, by showing up consistently even when she was angry or distant, by proving day after day that he was not going anywhere. Victoria's journey toward forgiveness had been slower and more complicated. She could see that Nathan had genuinely changed, that fatherhood had transformed him in ways that success and wealth never could. But there were still moments when she remembered the cold dismissal in his voice 5 years ago, still nights when she wondered if he might wake up one day and decide that family life was too messy for his carefully controlled world. A quiet evening in spring. Almost exactly 7 years after the night Nathan had given Victoria her ultimatum, he found himself in the same spot where everything had gone wrong. But this time, instead of looking out at the city with the cold satisfaction of a conqueror, he was on his knees in Victoria's small garden, helping Emma plant the tomatoes they had started from seeds months earlier. "Daddy, you have to be more careful," Emma scolded gently, her small hands guiding his much larger ones as they nestled a seedling into the soil. "Plants are very fragile when they're little. They need lots of love and attention to grow big and strong." Nathan smiled at the unconscious wisdom in her words. "Just like little girls," he said, tweaking her nose gently. "They need lots of love and attention too." Emma giggled and threw her arms around his neck, dirt-covered hands and all. "Good thing I have lots of both," she announced confidently. And Nathan's heart swelled with the knowledge that she was right. She did have lots of love and attention from both her parents. And she was growing up knowing without question that she was wanted and cherished. Later that evening, after Emma had been bathed and put to bed with a story about brave princesses and gentle dragons, Nathan found Victoria on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. He had been thinking about this moment for months, planning what he would say, how he would ask the question that had been burning in his heart. Since the day he realized that he had been given a second chance at the only thing that truly mattered. "Victoria," he said quietly, sitting beside her on the old wooden swing he had installed when they moved into the house. "There's something I need to ask you." She turned to look at him, and in the soft twilight, she looked almost exactly like the woman he had fallen in love with 8 years ago, before fear and arrogance had nearly destroyed everything worth having. "What is it?" Nathan took a deep breath and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I know I have no right to ask this," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I know that I hurt you in ways that can never be completely healed, and I know that. Forgiveness is a gift you've already given me more generously than I deserved. But Victoria, I love you. I love you and Emma more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of the family you've given me." He opened the box to reveal a simple solitaire diamond, elegant in its understated beauty. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Will you let me be not just Emma's father, but your husband? Will you let us be a real family? Officially, And forever? Victoria looked at the ring, then up at Nathan's face, seeing in his eyes all the love and hope and desperate sincerity that had been missing 7 years ago when she needed it most. She thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the pain and struggle and slow healing that had transformed them both into people capable of this kind of love. As she whispered, and the words seemed to release something that had been held tight in both their hearts for far too long. Yes, Nathan, I'll marry you. The ending they deserved 1 year later. Emma Sterlingcross stood in her parents' backyard, scattering flower petals as her mother and father promised to love each other for the rest of their lives. She took her job as flower girl very seriously, making sure each petal fell in exactly the right spot as Victoria walked down the makeshift aisle between their friends and family. Nathan waited at the simple altar. They had set up beneath the old oak tree, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. As she approached, she was beautiful in her simple white dress, but more than that. She was radiant with the joy of a woman who had fought for love and won. Emma beamed at both of them, proud to be part of this moment that made official what had already been true. In their hearts for months, the ceremony was small and intimate, attended only by the people who mattered most to them. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears in the front row, and Nathan's business partner served as best man, still amazed by the transformation he had witnessed in his formerly ruthless colleague. But the most important guest was Emma, who giggled with delight when Nathan lifted her up so she could help him kiss the bride. "Now we're really a family," Emma announced to everyone present, her voice carrying clearly across the small gathering. "Daddy says that families are people who choose to love each other every single day, even when it's hard." Nathan and Victoria exchanged a look over their daughter's head, both remembering the long journey that had brought them to this moment. They had learned that love was not just a feeling, but a choice, made new each morning. They had discovered that forgiveness was not a single act, but an ongoing decision to believe in the possibility of change. Most importantly, they had learned that the family they had built together, through struggle and patience and unwavering commitment, was stronger than the one they might have had if everything had been easy from the beginning. 10 years later, the sound of laughter filled the backyard of the Cross family home as Emma, now 16, chased her younger brother Marcus around the garden while their parents watched from the porch swing. Marcus was 3 years old, born 2 years after Nathan and Victoria's wedding, and he possessed his father's determination, combined with his mother's gentle heart and his sister's fearless spirit. Emma had grown into a remarkable young woman, confident and compassionate with dreams of becoming a doctor so she could help families the way her parents had learned to help each other. She remembered very little of the time before Nathan had been part of their lives, but she understood the significance of their family's story. She knew that love sometimes required second chances, that people could change if they wanted to badly enough, and that the strongest families were often the ones that had to fight hardest to stay together. Nathan, now in his 40s, had found a balance between his business success and his family life that he never could have imagined in his younger years. Cross Industries continued to thrive, but Nathan had learned to delegate, to trust others with responsibilities that once would have consumed his every waking moment. He coached Marcus's Little League team, attended every one of Emma's school events, and made sure to be home for dinner with his family every night, unless absolutely necessary. Victoria had returned to school while Emma was in middle school, earning her master's degree in social work so she could help other single mothers navigate the challenges she had once faced alone. She ran a nonprofit organization that provided support and resources to families in transition, and Nathan's company was one of their biggest supporters. Together, they had turned their painful past into a source of strength for others facing similar struggles. The letter on the 10th anniversary of the night Nathan had given Victoria her ultimatum. He sat down at his desk and wrote a letter to his younger self. It was something his therapist had suggested years earlier. During the difficult period when he had first been trying to understand why he had made such devastating choices, he had written many such letters over the years, but this one felt different. This one felt like a goodbye to the man he used to be. "Dear Nathan," he wrote, 10 years ago tonight, you made the worst decision of your life. You let fear rule you, and in your cowardice, you threw away the most precious gift anyone had ever offered you. You thought you were protecting your empire, but what you were really protecting was your own wounded heart. So afraid of vulnerability that you would rather be alone than risk being hurt. I want you to know that the woman you sent away that night was stronger than you ever imagined. She raised your daughter with grace and love and fierce determination. She turned your rejection into motivation, your cruelty into compassion. Emma grew up knowing she was wanted and loved and valuable, despite the fact that her father was too, broken to see what he was throwing away. But I also want you to know that redemption is possible, even for someone like you. Even for someone who could look at the woman he loved, carrying his child, and choose pride over family. It won't be easy, and you won't deserve the forgiveness you receive. But if you can learn to be humble, if you can learn to put someone else's needs before your own ambitions, if you can learn to love without trying to control, then maybe you can become the man your family deserves. The empire you're so worried about protecting will still be there in 10 years. It's bigger and more successful than you ever dreamed. But it will be meaningless without the people who make it matter. Don't make the same mistake I almost made. Don't let fear steal the only things that can truly make you rich. Nathan folded the letter carefully and placed it in the desk drawer. With all the others, then he walked out to the porch where Victoria was reading while Marcus napped in her lap and Emma practiced piano in the living room. He sat beside his wife and pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair and listening to the sounds of their children filling their home with life and love. "What are you thinking about?" Victoria asked quietly, looking up from her book. "Just remembering," Nathan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Remembering how close I came to losing all of this, and how grateful I am that you gave me a second chance to get it right." Victoria smiled and leaned into him, watching their son sleep peacefully in her arms. "We got it right together," she corrected gently. "That's what families do. They help each other become the people they're meant to be." As the sun set over their backyard, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Nathan Cross understood with absolute certainty that he was the richest man alive. Not because of the money in his bank accounts or the success of his business empire, but because he had learned the difference between being powerful and being loved. He had discovered that the greatest achievement of his life was not any deal he had closed or any company he had acquired, but the simple fact that when Emma came home from school each day, she ran to him, calling Daddy with pure joy in her voice, the man who had once given the woman he loved 48 hours to leave his life, now knew that he would spend every remaining day of his life, grateful that she had found the strength to build something beautiful from the ashes of his cruelty. Their love story had not begun with a fairy tale romance, but it had grown into something deeper and stronger than any storybook ending. It was a love built on forgiveness and second chances, on the daily choice to see the best in each other, on the understanding that the most valuable things in life are not those that come easily, but those that are worth fighting for. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson Nathan Cross ever learned, that a man's true wealth is not measured in dollars or deals, but in the love of his family and the knowledge that he has used his second chance to become worthy of the gift he was given. The CEO, who had once thought feelings were weakness, discovered that love was actually the greatest strength of all, and that the empire he had built meant nothing without the family who had taught him how to be human.